the first thing that comes into my mind, but I was only a little tiny kid, was World War II. I was 3 when it started, and I guess I don't remember any of the bad things. I remember the fun things, like the flashlights. Well, there was very early on, there was some sort of a panic situation, and my father was an air raid warden, but we had these black curtains that fit up around you couldn't have any light showing, so that if enemy bombers came across. But I remember we had blackout curtains for the dining room, so that we could sit around the dining room table and have light in that room. But they had to fit very tightly in. And it was fun because it was very cozy. I mean, there was no television. We were much more self-contained. I don't remember the radio being that big an issue.
No.
I used to listen to not soap operas, but Sky King and The Lone Ranger, and they had a whole series every 15 minutes. It would start about 4:30 in the afternoon, and they'd go until 6 o'clock. It's like the kids watch.
Right.
But I don't remember the nighttime television programs that they talk so much about, the Amos and the Andy, and
You're kind of young to remember that.
That wasn't a big issue. My family consisted of my mother and father, and my grandmother lived with us, and I also had an uncle. My father's youngest brother lived with us. My grandmother was a widow, and part of the whole deal of our moving to Auburndale was that my grandmother had $1,000, and it was how did it work? That if she could have a home with my mother and father, she would give them $1,000 toward a down payment on a house in Auburndale. And the way we came to Auburndale, my mother and father lived in Boston. They had been married for 3 years, and my mother was pregnant with me. So they wanted to move to the suburban living.
Yeah.
So we came to Auburndale because I always understood that it was the railroad line. The trains were super trains then, and it was the end of the railroad line. And so this is where you went. So we first we lived, and I don't remember this house at all. This is where the house from which I was born is down on Commonwealth Avenue, right across from where the Star Market is now. And it was a 2-family house, and the only way that I know it is because it's the only one that's got a roof on the all the other porches don't have roofs. So that's how I don't remember that house at all. We lived there until I was about 1.5 years old, and then my parents moved to a single house, still renting, down near Normbigger Park. And I have very, very, very vague memories of that. The sunlight coming in, in the afternoon on the hall and making funny patterns on the rug. But I don't really remember much about that. And then just before I was 3, they bought the house over on Ware Road. And they still live there. And it's weird. My high school books are still in the attic, and the wallpaper in the bed, and it's been a very stable thing for my own kids. It's home because I rent this house. So we moved there, and that was just as the war was starting. So I can remember so many things like that don't mean anything to you, like the ash cans. We had in the basement we had a coal burner. Not only a coal burner, we had a coal bin, and the coal. I can remember this. The coal man would come with a coal chute, and I think if somebody put a coal chute down my window today, I would still know what it was. And you had to stoke, so you had to get down and throw so much coal into the furnace. Of course, I didn't have too much to do with that. And my father is a do-it-yourselfer. He's and he had some kind of a Rube Goldberg contraption that I remember the strings coming up from the basement all the way up to the second floor, that you could open the damper or close the damper or something like that. Well, then World War II started, and I guess it was about 1943. I remember this. I was old enough to remember quite clearly. First, my uncle went in the service. He was a sophomore at Harvard, I think, or maybe even a junior. When he went into the service, and then very shortly thereafter, my father went. My father was the last person in Newton to be drafted. He was 37 years old. He could have gotten out of it. He was one of those, he had a wife and family, but he didn't try very hard. So he was stationed at Fort. He never got beyond Fort Devens. He used to come home. I saw more of my father when he was in the Army than I ever did when he was at home. He used to come home, take the train to Waltham, and once in a while he'd get a Jeep and he'd come home. And so he came home every single weekend. But what I can remember before he went in the service, the train was a tremendously big part of. I don't know whether it was Auburndale's life or whether it was my life, but we lived in an area, they call it Railroad Hill, and I would say half of it's the wrong side of the tracks. This is the right side of the tracks.
Okay.
My mother, this feels strange. My daughter finally made it to the right side of the tracks, but a lot of railroad people lived in our neighborhood. I can remember the uniforms that, they're really, they were black and usually shiny in the seat. But I can remember the people going to the you saw there were the 7:15 people and there were the 8:45 people, and there were different groups. But the thing I remember most vividly was when they came home, that standing on the corner of the street and looking down the street, waiting for my father. And it was. I remember it as hordes of people. Now maybe it wasn't, but I can just, this whole steady, continuing stream of people coming up the street from my father coming home, and I can remember running down the street, and I must have been maybe like 4 or 5, saying, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy," and my father stopped me and he said, "I don't want you to call me Daddy anymore." For some reason, he had always called his father, I don't know, Fadi, I think it was, but he said, "From here on in, I want you to call me either Bill or Father." And I can remember, you don't call your father Bill. I wouldn't call my father Bill now. So I called him, I still refer to him as Father. Now I call him Pop. But I always felt kind of left out. Everybody else had a daddy, and I had a father. And I just, sometimes, in some ways, I think he was just trying to be a little bit more genteel. And it was, I had mixed feelings about it. Sometimes it was, I was a little embarrassed.
Yeah, I can see that.
But I can remember him particularly stopping and saying, "I don't want you to call me Daddy anymore." And I don't know what, anyway, it's stuck in my mind. But then he went in the service, and we changed the oil burner. There was something done about something was done to the furnace before, I don't think it was converted to oil at that point, but there was a big fuss about how was my mother going to manage the ash barrels. You had these, at least we did, we had 2 monumental, heavy ash cans. I still call them ash cans. I don't call them trash cans. They're ash cans.
I was wondering what they were.
It's a trash can.
Okay.
And I'll still say, I will say to the kids, we got to take the ash barrels out. And they, huh? And I'm thinking out 4 hefty trash bags, but to me, I still think of it as taking the ash barrels out, and they were ungodly, heavy load. So my father made some kind of a dolly to carry that would fit on this trash can, and I can remember the little kid trying to shove this thing, but I had no idea, as a matter of how much they weighed, but it was extremely heavy, and it was a real problem when he went in the service. There was some neighbor that very, very faithfully came over and trudged out, trundled, I guess would be the word, these 2 ash cans every week for the rubbish man. We also had garbage collection. Had a garbage can and that was, and they don't do things like that anymore. I mean, but first of all, we don't have garbage anymore. Everybody's got disposals and anything like that. But that was a big deal. The people that came to your house, there was the garbage can, the garbage man. He usually, I don't know whether anybody got their garbage picked up at 10 o'clock in the morning, but they always came to us at 5 in the morning. You could hear them out there clunking around. There was the milkman. And everybody had a milkman.
Bottles of milk.
Bottles, yeah, and you had the little insulated container out in your bed in case he came when you weren't home. We didn't have a bread man. But a lot of people did. A bread man was a big deal around the neighborhood. And who else was there? There was a produce man. And again, I don't think we had too much to do with him. But I could accept once in a while you'd go snitch something off the back of this thing. And somebody came with ice. Now, I don't know whether that was an ice man. I remember snitching the ice off the back of the truck. Now, I don't know whether he was actually selling ice or what he was selling. But these were all things that went on. This was, and kids congregated behind it and so forth and so. There were a lot of kids.
Were there?
My ex-husband lived 3 blocks away, but we never knew each other. We never knew each other until after we graduated from high school.
Really?
It was the whole. But the only memory I have of him when I was little was he was the big kid the Freeman Street gang, and the last 2 or 3 days before school would start, the kids get restless and you go to camp and the whole thing. But there's all sorts of turmoil in the neighborhood, and God, I can remember this vividly. I must have been like, 2nd or 3rd grade, and the people across the street from us had a crabapple tree, and they were little. I mean, they were totally useless for anything except guided missiles. And it was almost like an annual event. The Freeman Street gang would descend over the hill, and then we would fight with the crab apples, and the parents would be called. Everybody's mother was home. That was another thing. Everybody's mother was there. There were mothers and there were grandmothers and much more extended family. My grandmother was a very important part of our house. My mother worked a little bit. She taught. My mother was a dietitian, but she never taught much. She taught at a private school in Boston a couple of days a week, but my grandmother was the one we had a washboard. Really, we had a washboard. My grandmother used to use it, and she ironed. And she was a very, very important part of the household. And that crabapple tree. The other day, the people, that house is still there. The crabapple tree finally died, I don't know how many years ago. And it was replaced with a weeping willow tree. And they just cut the weeping willow tree. And I can't believe I'm old enough to have seen a 3rd tree growing in that spot. It really, it's strange. So, one of the things about George's family, his mother was Italian. That side of the family was Italian. And his grandmother had a grape arbor. And
she had a what?
A grape arbor. That they had tremendous number of grapes. So see, I didn't know them the only recollection I have as a child was that if you reached over the wall into her yard, she would come out and yelling at you with a broom. And I have a lot of things now that we've talked about over the other side of he can remember things like they're making the wine and so forth, but I didn't know him then. But we had a lot of gardens.
Vegetable?
Well, during the war, we had Victory Garden. We all sorts of patriotic things. I mean, really,
What's a victory garden?
a Victory Garden. Well, that was if you grew your own tomato plants and green beans or something like that. Then you were, the things that came from all, the Midwest went to the service.
Mm-hmm.
Everything was designed to go to the serviceman. So if the more you could grow your own, more you could produce your own, and so forth. There were little, you had, everything was rationed.
Mm-hmm.
Shoes were rationed. I can remember the shoes. I remember particularly. I think you got 2 ration cards a year, and and no sneakers or anything like that. You had your little pair of Oxfords and a pair of Mary Janes. Those were the dress up. But the Oxfords, I can remember the end of school. My mother used to. She doesn't like to remember this. She swears she didn't, but she did. She used to cut the toes out of the Oxfords and make them into sandals.
Oh, really?
That was what you wore in the summertime. The kid got an extra 3. You got your money's worth out of it. What else was rationed? Butter. I can remember that vividly. One of the things, we had a 1938 Ford. 1935, it was old.
Mm-hmm.
Would I love to have it now? But the gas was rationed, and we were of low priority. We had very little gasoline, so they took it off the road. They put it up. What they call it, put it up on blocks. And I don't remember much of the mechanics of that. I do remember that the headlights were painted. Have you ever seen in old movies?
No.
Again, with going along with the blackout thing.
Oh.
The headlights, the round headlight, they would paint the top half. It looked just like an eyelid. So presumably if you were driving along from overhead,
right,
the light wouldn't show up and so forth. I remember the headlights being painted. But the car was put up on blocks, so it was the train. Again, not only did we have good trains, but we used to go to Waltham. I mean, you could get a bus to Waltham every 15, 20 minutes. And there was a butter and egg store over there, Kennedy's Butter and Egg Store. And I used to be planted in that line.
Mm-hmm.
Kennedy's also had homemade peanut butter for some reason. Remember that. But my mother and my grandmother and I would go, and I would be planted in one line, and my grandmother would go on another line for Lord knows what. Mm-hmm. And my mother would get the bread and so forth and so on. I don't know whether bread was rationed or not, but it was.
Did you make your own, or did you buy it?
We bought bread but the margarine. Oh, that was. See, now this is the really fun thing. It was illegal to color margarine. The butter lobby was really, really strong, and that margarine was available, but it could only be sold white. And so it looked like lard. I mean, it was really nasty looking. So they had a variety of different things that they would do. The two that I remember was the butter would come, and it would come with a little packet of coloring, and you could color it yourself. And that was the sort of thing that a 5 and 6 year old kid would. I can remember sitting there, with something to color it, to mash it all up, and then you'd form it back into a shape. And the other thing was toward the end. I was older then. After the war, they had it came in a plastic container with a little breakable bubble, and you would break it and then squeeze it. I mean, this was a much very, very more packaging like today, but for coloring the margarine. My mother had a catering business too. While my father was in the service, she made tea sandwiches and so forth and so on. She got food for that. I can't remember. I mean, I remember things like smoked shoulders and I don't know where she got the food for that. I don't remember. She also did dressmaking.
Oh, really?
My mother was a very clever woman, and I can remember at one point somebody producing the silk from a parachute to make a wedding dress, or I can sort of
fancy dress.
Something. I mean, it had to do with the wedding. I don't know whether the parachute was for the dress or whether it was for the slip or whatever it was. But I remember feeling it, and I remember not being terribly interested because I was a little kid. The school that I went to was the Charles C. Burr Elementary School, and it's down. So I don't know how familiar you are with that.
Not very.
There's an elderly housing project now on Ash Street, and it's across the street from Corpus Christi Church. When I was going to school, it was a big old archy building. It must have been, I don't know, 1890s or something like that. And the church, we went to the Church of the Messiah, which was Episcopal down the other way. But the Catholic Church was a struggling young Catholic parish, and that what they had done was they had built this humongous church, but they didn't have the money to finish it, so the actual church was in the basement. And I can remember going to get ashes on Ash Wednesday because all my friends were Catholic, and I can remember the holy water. That
you weren't Catholic.
I wasn't Catholic. I wasn't. Well, no, I mean, well, it was fun. I mean, kids do it today. But the thing that I can remember that if you went into, well, I guess they still have. I don't know whether Feline's or the department stores will have the perfume and the little bubbling fountains. Well, I remember the first time I went into the Catholic church and the holy water. I thought it was going to be. I go, it doesn't have any smell to it at all. But I thought it would be scented for some reason. But the church was down in the basement, and actually it was a very pretty, even down in the basement. It's kind of, again, looking back as an adult, I think Jay went to Boy Scouts down there, and it's kind of good. I mean, I remember it as a church.
Right.
Now it's a church basement. But the school, we used to have air raid. Again, we would have, wait a minute, now I'm jumping ahead. This was after WW2, and I was still there. I went to junior high in 1950, so this was toward the late 40s, having air raid shelter drills. I honestly can't remember which war we were in, but I remember going, being led down in the basement, everybody sitting down there and putting their heads down, and against the wall, and we used to have square dancing lessons in the church, in the school basement.
Was that after school?
No, it was during school. They didn't have the exotic physical ed things that we used to have. Phys ed was a very athletic lady who used to come about 3 times a year. Miss Tarbell. Oh God, I can remember she had the leg. And she had a whistle. And she came I remember this 3 times a year, and she would take us in the spring across, and we would play softball, and in the wintertime, we would square dance in the basement, and I guess basketball or something like that. But there wasn't much of any schoolyard or anything. I mean, physical ed wasn't a big thing. We used to, what do I remember about the school? The savings bonds. Again, World War II. Kindergarten, went to kindergarten in the afternoon. My kindergarten teacher was a woman, Mrs. Draper. I think she has just died. She taught in Newton. Well, my mother-in-law had her. When I had her, she was a woman of near 60s. My mother-in-law, she had taught my mother-in-law 30 years before that. But she was an institution. I mean, she just taught everybody. And I don't remember too much about kindergarten, but first and second grade, we used to have, there was the collections for the savings bonds. They were victory, this was again connected with the war. They were selling stamps. You could buy either a 10-cent book, a 25-cent book, or I think there might have been a 50-cent book. What you would do, the savings, the $25 savings bond was $18.75. You would buy a stamp, toward it, and when you had finally got $18.75 worth, then you'd give them in this like a green stamp book. And I usually had 2 books going. I had a 10-cent book and a 25-cent book, and it would, come Thursday, it would depend on whether my mother had a quarter or whether she had a dime.
Right.
And that was a lot of money then. I can remember when ice cream went from a nickel to 10 cents, and that was a big deal. All the drugstores had, they all had fountains. That was one of the things I said to the kids, something about a soda fountain. What's the soda fountain? I mean, everybody had, the drugstores had them. There were all these little spas around that had things like, do you know what a cherry Coke is? Yeah. And see, now, that was, they didn't have those. But anyway, they don't have them now. They did then. But we would save for the savings bond. Another thing we would do, I think they do it now for like people in prisons, but these little Red Cross boxes, the box was a little cardboard box about the size of maybe half the size of a shoebox, and each classroom would have one, and they would assemble all the things that would be sent to a serviceman. There would be like a comb, razor blades, chewing gum. There was a whole list of probably 25 or 30 things that you could put in your Red Cross box. And it would be a class project to fill up a box. Who was going to bring the shoelaces and who was going to, and then make, fit in this little tiny box. But that was a big deal. Now, whether we did that more than once, I seem to remember like doing it all the time. But you would finish it up, to go off to a serviceman, presumably for Christmas or whatever. We did a lot of, I can remember everybody knitting khaki-colored things. My grandmother was, you were just constantly doing this knitting things made out of khaki. We used to save the tin cans. That was fun. This was a big deal. It was like recycling. The tin cans, you would cut the top and the bottom off of the tin can, and you would flatten it. And that was my job. I would flatten it, so that you could get more in the paper bag. And then when the bag was full, up in front of the library, there was this big chicken wire kind of a thing where you would take your cans and they would be recycled. You saved your bacon grease and your cooking grease. That went back. I don't know how it worked, whether you had to take back so much fat in order to buy another pound, buy a pound of bacon or something like that. But it was recycled. Whether how the mechanics of it, I don't remember. But I remember there was always a tin can with 2/3 of a thing of grease. I can remember too, we had a 5-pound, my mother won't admit to this, we had 5 pounds of sugar up in the attic. Because sugar and coffee, I think, were probably the biggest thing. And that wasn't important thing, because I was a little kid. But we had 5 pounds of sugar hidden in the attic. Just in case.
And I can see.
Well, the thing I can remember is after the war, taking it, I was, I think it was like lead. I mean, it was all, but it was up there anyway. And my, I don't know who it was, whether it was my great grandmother or somebody coming to visit, and using 4 teaspoons of sugar in their tea. And I think my mother and my grandmother talked about it the rest of them. Can you remember the day? What did we do at night? We used to go to the movies. In the Auburndale Park, which is where the Marriott is now, was a big deal. It was a very, very nice amusement park. It was a small, it wasn't like, but it was a nice place to go. I can remember starting to go there when I was like, maybe 6 or 7. Well, when I was really little, we used to go with and they had outdoor movies. And then as I got older, it was, you'd go with your friends. And I can remember, being out until 9 o'clock and then 10 o'clock. And they used to show movies down there, and but then there was a movie theater in West Newton. There were 2 movie theaters in Three in Waltham.
How did you get to these places?
Good question. Well, we take the bus when I went with my parents, but when I went with my friends, that's an excellent question. there were buses. My mother would give me 25 cents. And for 25 cents, it cost 10 cents to get into the movie. I can't quite remember the breakdown, but what it was, basically, for 25 cents, you could have transportation one way. You could have a candy bar, and you could get in. So the decision was always, should we walk to the movie? And everybody else did the same thing. Everybody's mother gave them a quarter. So should you walk to the movies and then take the bus home, or should you take the bus to the movies and then walk home? Once I walked from Newton Corner. That's so long.
Is it?
Yeah, that was 5 or 6 months. But generally, it's so strange. I mean, these people are still on Burton Reed, and I don't remember I always remember the boy. I guess I'm very old. Remember the boys much better than the girls. Oh God! But the movies was an all-day deal.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they would have cereals and at least a double feature. And I only the tail end of giving away things. I remember at one point they had there was a deal for a bicycle on a Saturday morning matinee. The Saturday morning matinee would go from like 10 to, it would kill the day. By the
How could you watch them outside if it was light out?
Oh no, this was the real movies. The Norumbega Park was they showed 5. As soon as it got dark, they would show 5. One would be a newsreel, one would be a Three Stooges. They're the same ones that you still see on now. On Travelog, and then I can't remember what the other two were, but it was a very set pattern. But no, this was indoor movies, and the theater in Waltham had stars. That was a very elegant 30s type of thing, where you would tell them just before they were going to have the theater, because the stars would come on and then they would twinkle, and West Newton wasn't quite as elegant. West Newton had these plush seats, and kids used to get I guess it was ringworm, I don't know, but but you would be sent. I can read. Listen, there's germs. I got to tell you about germs in a minute here. But the ringworm, you were always very careful not to put your head back against this plush seat for fear. You too would get ringworm, and the treatment for ringworm was they would shave your head, and then you would wear the top of a nylon stocking. Oh God! And I don't know quite. I never got it. Yeah. So I don't know what it was, but polio. I think this really makes me realize how old I am. Is that I grew up under the shadow of polio. I can remember the ambulance coming up the street. I can remember in August. I remember one hot August night when I was a little kid, having a headache, and my mother getting, is her neck swollen? And kids got polio. Kids died. You didn't go. I mean, you literally did not go into crowds. You didn't. I mean, so you went to the Cape to get away from the city, and you. It's by my own kids. I remember my own kids having a headache with it. I think, I'll take an aspirin to go to bed. But I mean, I can really remember this real worry. My mother and my grandmother, outside my bedroom door. Should we call the doctor? And we used to go the Charles River when I was very little. We used to be able to swim. And it was dirty. And my mother knew enough so that it was really iffy. They closed it very short. There was only a couple, but you really had to beg and plead. I mean, she wouldn't let you go just on a warm day. It had to be a real scorcher, because again, you had this specter of polio hanging over your head. And then impetigo. I don't even know what impetigo was, but that was one of the terrible things that you got from going down down to the playground and swimming. We used to skate down there in the wintertime. They still do. Auburndale was always like at we always had all the skaters when I went to high school and so forth and so on, always came from Auburndale because we had the good ice. Auburndale and Newtonville had the good ice. The kids over Newton Center didn't live near any water. So, that was skating. What else did we do? Television came into the picture just about the time that you're not interested
Right.
in. Because we got a television when I was just when I was starting junior high. What other things?
Did you play with kids in your own neighborhood?
I had two particular friends. They were both a year younger than I am, and was, and it was always like 2 against 1. I mean, I guess that goes on. We used to play war a lot. God, everything centers around that damn war.
I know it.
But we used to, I can remember wearing a hubcap as a war helmet. And that it didn't fit very well. I got a pair of roller skates when I was a fairly solitary kid as I think back. I had friends, but I used to do an awful lot by myself. Played dolls a lot. Used to take the fireplace screen and make a house out of the fireplace screen. The roller skates were a big thing. I remember learning to roller skate in the basement in the wintertime. And then when the spring came, getting out, and I lived on a hill and spending hours going down the hill and back up again. I got a bicycle. I didn't get a bicycle. I mean, again, things were different. My father told me I could have a bicycle when I was 12. Well, that was a little extreme. So I started saving when I was 7 or 8 years old. And I saved for 2 years. And I saved $13. And by that time I was almost 10. And the bicycle was 26. And my parents matched the money. But that was a big deal. I mean, compared to today's society where a kid my kids got their first bicycle when they were 5.
Did your parents give you an allowance?
Always had an allowance. And I don't ever remember. Never knew whether we were rich or poor. I guess maybe kids.
Yeah.
Never, as I say, I never knew whether we were rich or poor. I went to school with a lot of kids who were poorer than we were. A lot I remember they used to smell of coal oil. I had a stove. I guess kerosene. I don't like. I was, and I can remember the smell of kerosene. And went to talk about being rich and being poor. I think we were poorer than a lot of our neighbors because somewhere along the line when I was, again, elementary school age, I took dancing lessons. We used to go at the Auburndale Club. That's what's now the Turtle Lane Players. I don't know again whether you're familiar with it, but it was a big old building, and they had a stage, and they rented out for a variety of things. A table when the church burned down, we used to use it. But I took dancing lessons, and there were 3 semesters, and for some reason I didn't go to the middle semester. I can remember I went to the first, and I learned how to do the 5 positions of balance. I was a fat little kid. Do the 5 positions, and then I didn't go for the middle semester, but then I went for the last one so that I could be in the recital. And my mother was doing a lot of dressmaking at that point, I think probably to pay so that I could have dancing lessons. And they insisted that we buy the costumes from their particular person, and they were incredibly expensive. I can remember my mother in all this fuss. Look at this! It's made out of tissue paper, and it's again, as an adult, I can see the frustration she must have had. That she'd spent a lot of money and had to buy this. I don't know. I can't even remember what color it was, but I know I was part of the rainbow, and I don't think I ever got, yeah, I had I remember the ballet slippers. Another thing, the library was a very, very, very important part of, this is where I really feel the continuity with the community, because that library, I mean, that was a center of I read every single book in that children's section, and the memory that I think, one of my earliest memories was getting my own library card. And you had to be able to, I don't know whether there was an age thing, but you had to be able to write your name.
Mm-hmm.
And I was I guess you had to be 6 and you had to be able to write your name. That was what it was. So I turned 6, and I knew how, Newton taught you only how to print. Or all I knew how to was print. So we spent like a week learning how to write my name. You know, we practiced and we practiced, and I could finally write my name in cursive. But we get up there and they say, okay, now here, sign this card, and they give me a pen. I had practiced, and I can remember. I can remember that like it was yesterday. This feeling of, I don't know how to use a pen. I only know how to use a pencil, and labor. And I remember the sweat dripping off of me and off of my hands. And but I guess I got the library card because. But then the next thing was, I spent a lot of time reading, and I got to the stage somewhere about the 4th or 5th grade when I wanted to read the adult books, and oh no, children's card, you could only, and I can remember, when you got to junior high, everything was great, you know, when you got to junior high, then you could get the books off that shelf, and I used to, you know, if I went with my mother, she would, you know, take books out, but they wouldn't let you have them. You know, those are junior. You don't look like you're in junior high. So you had. I mean, it was. I think how dumb some of the things were. Auburndale has an addition onto their library, the children's room, and that was a big deal in Auburndale. I mean, at least somehow I remember it as a big deal. That right after the war, it was supposedly given by the Plummer family, and I don't know who the Plumbers were, but there was a big dedication, and the mayor came, and we all tramped down from the Charles C. Burr School, and we had all, I don't know, contributed or I remember, I've always felt that I participated very strongly in the building of that children's library. I mean, how much of it really is true or not, but there was always a feeling that the Plumbers got their name on it, but actually everybody contributed. I mean, whether they were. I always had a feeling that I'm, you know, in there for more than just a stone or two, but I don't quite know how. What else? Oh, there was a summer school, the music school. That was I loved that. Up at LaSalle, every summer, they would have a convention of music teachers from all over the country. And toward the end of the school year, they needed people to come to the school. So they would always have this great, because kids didn't do in the summertime, like you went maybe to the Cape for a week. I mean, that was what summer was. You went away for a week. I remember I went to day camp for a week, or maybe I think 2 weeks to the day camp. I went to overnight camp for 1 week, and that was, I hated it. But anyway, so I mean, the summer was really stretched out there. So the summer school was, for 2 weeks, you were kept more or less occupied for half the summer. So they would come around and recruit toward the end of the school year about who wants to go to the music school, and the carrot that they always held out to you was that at the last day they would give you ice cream. Now I loved it. It was a fun thing, and what they would do is that you would go and they would. I remember doing a lot of dancing and you know, musical kind of things. You know, they would practice. I would assume that they would discuss theory in the afternoon, and then they'd practice on this group of kids in the morning. And then at the end, we would always, the last day, we would have the ice cream, but a pageant, some kind of a musical extravaganza. And LaSalle is situated as the sort of like a natural amphitheater.
Mhm.
And God, that was a big, fun thing.
Was everyone in it? And...
I don't mean friends, anywhere along the line. I really don't remember all that much in the way of friends. Well, now when I say friends, I can remember different people. Honey Bradley and Carolyn Dalbier and
did your friends go to this with you?
I don't remember.
You don't?
I really don't remember. Now I'm spilling over to the junior high thing. Girl Scouts, well, not Girl Scouts, the brownies.
Brownies.
Oh, I hated brownies. Oh, did I? I've never been a joiner. The brownies met at the Congregational Church. There's a building there. They still have it there, and it was. I don't remember who went. The only ones I can remember, there were like about 6 of us, and the leader was Mrs. Ahern, was a large fat lady, and she had a daughter named Sheila that I hated. Oh, did I hate Sheila Ahern? I remember always. Then the other one. Then there's Judy Glazer. 2 people I hated. But we used to go to Girl Scouts, and it was brownies. I only was a Girl Scout long enough to get the uniform. But I used to frequently. My mother would send me off with my 25-cent dues, and I would get lost. I used to wander around this area. Where it was quite close to this house here, and I used to wander around LaSalle and look around and pretend what it was like to be a college girl and all that sort of thing. Another thing that we did that I remember is, now this must have been this was during the war too. Again, the financials. My mother rented rooms. We had a 3-bedroom house, and my grandmother had one. My uncle was off in the war, and I had a little cubby that I slept in. But there were really 2 rooms that my mother. No, the big master bedroom. My mother moved out of that, and she used to rent that. She rented to a man who was doing war work. No big deal. I mean, somehow today I think, oh God, having a stranger come in your house. But we rented that. But then LaSalle would have their commencement, or graduation, or whatever they called it. And this was weren't places to stay. There was no Holiday Inn, there was no Marriott. So that they would enlist all of the local people, and who's got how many rooms to rent, and these people, we always felt that they were very, the upper crust coming from here or there, and probably just as ordinary as anybody else, if they were from out of town.
Right.
So we always rented a room to a college family for their graduation. And it was kind of fun, you keep, be sure you wipe up the bathroom sink, I mean, all the things you tell. But that was a fun thing that, my mother put her hand to a lot of, and it was what a shock. I mean, my mother's always been this nice little sweet lady, and I can remember her almost pounding on the table. I want to see the manager, and and pointing at this run in her silk stocking, and I can remember sort of being, in a way, sort of embarrassed, but also kind of proud. Hey, she's really standing up for herself. So how the thing was, the disposition of it, I don't remember. But then we took train from the South Station down to the Cape, and that was a big deal. And we stayed in some sort of a rooming house or something like that. And I guess knowing my mother, we probably ate one good meal. We probably went out for dinner, but at some point I know there was a jar with crackers and a jar of cheese spread, kind of thing. I guess that was lunch or something, I don't know. And I also remember bathing shoes. You don't know what bathing shoes are either. They were sort of like the consistency of a real heavy, I don't think they make bathing caps like that anymore. They were rubber. and they were designed to wear at the beach so that you could walk over stones or something. Like, well, today you wear flip-flops or
Right.
something like that, but these they were, anyway, I remember the bathing suits. I remember what they felt like, and I remember what they smelled like. It was very rubbery smelling, and somehow the cheese spread was in the suitcase somewhere. Because I guess we had lunch or breakfast or whatever it was, so that we wouldn't have to pay for another meal. But we did that excursion.
Did your whole family ever go somewhere? Well, like your dad?
After the war, in my particular case, after my father came out, and then my mother immediately got pregnant, and my brother was born in 1946. We used to go away. Then we began to be a little bit more prosperous. In terms of, I remember when we started having steak every Thursday. That was a big deal. And then we didn't do it. We spent 2 or 3 summers at the Cape. But by the time my brother was old enough to go places, my grandmother was getting sick and ailing, so not a tremendous amount. I had one deal. I used to go to day camp, as I said before.
Right.
At the Cabot Woods, I went.
Oh, really? There?
But the summer that my brother was expected, my brother was due to be born in August, and I was 7.5, and I was sent to Girl Scout camp, Camp Mary A. Day, which is out on the shores of Lake Cochituate. That I thought it was somewhere out in western Massachusetts. I mean, from a kid's standpoint, it was practically the New York border. But I was supposed to go to camp and stay to camp and love camp while my mother had this marvelous new baby. Well, it just didn't work out right at all. First of all, my brother wasn't born until September. I went to camp, and I hated it. Oh, I hated it more than anything in this whole world. I hated that camp. I was not cut out to be a camper. I lost like 4.5 pounds in 6 days or something like that. And my parents made the mistake of coming to visit me after the first week, and they came home with me. So that was a lost cause. But no, we didn't.
Did you go into Boston?
We used to. My mother was very, very good about getting me to see, and something that I've done with my kids. We used to go to the museums a lot. I remember it's going a lot. It was probably like twice during my growing up here, going to Mrs. Jack Gardner's, going to the Art Museum, Egyptian room only. But most of all, we used to go over to Harvard, we always called it, go to see the glass flowers. But glass flowers never particularly turned me on. Was more the whole, the animal, what do they call it, the botany, that whole complex of, I don't know whether you've been or not, but I still like to go. The natural history, I guess it is. The gems and the stuffed bears and the flying squirrels. I remember the thing I can remember. I remember the flying squirrels, and there was a gorilla over there, a male gorilla. It was my first lesson in male anatomy, and I can remember, running ahead of my mother so that I could stand and gaze for a minute and a half before she got there to see what I was looking at. I remember that vividly. Again, I have been back as an adult, and it's not really, Another thing when we got the car back, we used to go for rides. My grandmother at that point was, my brother had been born, and my grandmother was ailing, and we used to do things with the car. We used to go, there was a Dean Dairy out on Route 20, and go get ice cream. That was a big deal. That was a whole, ride around Weston and look at at that point there were a lot of farms and things and so forth out there. We used to go out and buy produce. Again, that was an expedition. Also, there was a little brook over, it's now the Western Town Dump, and that's really heartbreaking. But we used to go over there and swim. that was clean, and what else? I remember when my father was in the service, he came home, and this sticks to this day. My mother's very lavish at Christmas time, but everything that my mother always did everything. My father just, gave her the money. My father, the only present that I ever remember my father buying me as a kid was he brought me a muff, a bunny fur muff and mittens. And that I can feel those, and because he actually bought them,
right?
And that meant something out of all proportion. Another thing I can remember, my uncle was over in Europe all of this time. He was a translator, and he was in the thick of the war,
right?
And used to send things back. And he sent back, I remember, a couple of German napkins, a lot of German things, and I remember some things being bloodstained. And that, it's funny, as a kid, you knew. You tried not to think,
right.
That, you knew that it was somebody had died or whatever for that. And
that's scary.
But the attitude toward like the Japanese people, I never knew anybody who was black.
No.
I never knew anybody who was. You didn't have any. That was totally not an issue. There was a small black community in West Newton, but that was a million miles away.
Right.
Everybody was like you. That you either went to the Catholic Church or you went to the Protestant Church. I don't think I knew anybody. I don't think I knew anybody that was Jewish.
No.
Wait a minute, Lester Grinspoon. I think he was the commissioner or something like that. He was a big kid. He was a year older. But aside from being Jewish, he was quite like everybody else. But that wasn't an issue at all. Everybody was white and middle class, sort of Leave It to Beaver,
right?
Very, very much. My life was Leave It to Beaver. We used to, again, remember going back to Waltham, that I was a little kid. They had them up at the supermarket in Auburndale too, but they would sell cookies. It would be like a big tin can, and if you want, you'd buy them by the half a pound or whatever it was, and they were usually down fairly low, and I don't think I ever took one, but I saw a kid stealing one once, and I was a little kid, and I remember, oh, did you see that? And I remember my mother saying that what a terrible thing this was that this child had done, but perhaps he was hungry. And so that I certainly was never to do anything like this.
Right.
But perhaps, that maybe he could be forgiven because, in Waltham there were a lot of poor people and there wasn't enough to eat. Going back to the food again, the ration of meat, I remember my mother tells about the worst Sunday dinner we had. We always had meat on Sunday, she said, but we had an oxtail once. And I can't remember what it looked like cooked, but I can remember going into the supermarket. Well, first of all, it wasn't a supermarket, I beg your pardon. It was a store. And the big long counters full of ice, and there was like there'd be a little sprig of parsley here and then a yard down with the oxtails. And I remember looking at the oxtail and trying to imagine what it looked like. What did it look like when it was on the animal? This was in Auburndale, right about where the bank is. There was also a super nice 10-cent store. We had 10 cents worth?
Mm-hmm. I know.
Okay, nickel and dime we called it. I have some really happy memories about that. They had everything in the world, and that was the only place that I ever stole anything. And I was sure God was going to strike me dead. Paper clips. They had paper clips came in little round, or whatever it was I was buying was a little round cardboard container about the size of a pillbox, and I remember they were a nickel, I guess, and I don't know, maybe a dime, but I remember taking up and putting the contents of one into another so that I got two for so I left an empty container. That was the only thing that I ever stole that I can remember. And he was such a Mr. Weiner. My brother worked there later, or this was later.
Well, this is fine. Thank you.
Oh dear.